He was boxing's only perfect champion, undefeated, unstoppable, and feared for his iron will and thunderous power.
And the new heavyweight champion of the world, Rocky Marciano!
But on the eve of his 46th birthday, Rocky Marciano boarded a small private plane and never made it out alive. Officials called it an accident, but behind the crash were mob ties, missing cash, and a pilot who wasn't licensed to fly. So was it really just bad luck, or was someone trying to silence a legend? Let's break it all down. From an early age, Rocky Marciano had one obsession: money. Even as his fortune grew, and boy did it grow, he hated letting go of a dollar. He was notoriously tight-fisted and would go to surprising lengths, willingly crisscrossing the country just to make a few extra bucks. He was already wealthy, but still lived like he wasn't. And that obsession didn't fade after boxing. If anything, it got worse. Marciano's post-retirement life became a strange blend of paranoia, hustle, and erratic behavior. He chased cash, hoarded it, hid it, and some say that it was that relentless devotion to money that ultimately led him to his death. But to understand why Marciano was wired this way, why he was so fixated on riches, and why he feared losing it, we have to rewind. Because this story starts long before the fame and knockouts. Born Rocco Francis Marciano in 1923, he was the son of Italian immigrants who moved to the United States in search of the American dream. But that dream never came. Instead, Marciano and his 5 siblings grew up in grinding poverty on the south side of Brockton, Massachusetts. His father, Pierino, worked in a shoe factory, slaving away and drenched in sweat day after day for nothing more than a meager wage in return. Young Rocco used to bring him lunch while he was at work, and what he saw there never left him. The heat, the noise, the hopelessness. He swore he'd never end up that way, that he'd never settle for scraps and never work in a factory, ever. That was the moment he became determined to escape the life that seemed destined to be his. He developed an iron will to succeed, one that would eventually allow him to become one of the most famous heavyweight boxers of all time, despite his clear physical disadvantages like being underweight. But boxing wasn't his first love. Initially, he was determined to make it as a baseball player and spent hours smashing balls in pursuit of a dream that never quite materialized. Still, even then, the seeds of something bigger were being planted. Around the same time, he rigged up a makeshift gym, homemade weights, and a heavy bag hanging from a beam. He didn't know it yet, but boxing, not baseball, would become his ticket to fame and riches. Despite his vow not to follow his father's footsteps into the factory, life had other plans. Marciano ended up working several menial jobs to get by, including, ironically, shoemaking. But with World War II in full flow, he was drafted and shipped off to Europe with the U.S. Army. That's where boxing truly entered his life. At first, it was just a way to dodge kitchen duty. But once he stepped into the ring, something clicked. He had natural power, brute toughness, and a brawler's instinct, and ended up representing the Army as a boxer and even winning a tournament in 1946. Marciano would go on to retire with one of the most iconic records in boxing history: undefeated, untouchable.
Gentlemen, I would like to announce my retirement from boxing at this time.
But in the beginning, nothing about him said he'd even be able to make it as a pro, let alone become a future champion. His rather unpromising record in the amateurs was a modest 8 wins, 4 losses, hardly the stuff of legend. He had a brief pro debut in 1947, then returned to the amateurs before finally committing full-time the following year. And when he did, nobody believed in him. To most, he was just another undersized Italian kid trying to punch above his weight, literally. At only around 5'9" or maybe 10, he was short for a heavyweight, and despite his raw power, he was far from impressive. He was clumsy, wild, and completely unrefined. His footwork was hopeless. He was frequently seen swinging and missing, often losing his balance and sometimes almost falling through the ropes as a result. Marciano wasn't a big drinker, but in those early days he fought more like a drunk in a bar than a future all-time great. Sure, it was probably fun to watch if all you were interested in was seeing a slugfest that ended with someone unconscious on the floor. But if you were looking for the sweet science of boxing, Marciano wasn't it. But one thing's for sure, he wasn't the type to back down from anything. What he lacked in height, reach, and technique, he made up for with something far harder to teach: relentless toughness and an unbreakable will to win. His determination wasn't just apparent during his fights either, because he trained like an absolute beast. While most fighters prepared with 100 rounds of sparring, he sometimes pushed himself to 250. Apparently, he even trained the muscles in his eyeballs by staring at the swinging pendulum of a clock. No one's quite sure what advantage he thought that would give him, but it says everything about his desire to leave no stone unturned. He would do anything to be better prepared than the man across from him. And it certainly didn't hurt that he had one other weapon: frightening, jaw-dropping knockout power. When Marciano landed clean, most people didn't get up. He leaned on that early in his career: power and pressure. This combination proved more than enough for most of the lowly opponents he faced. His first 16 bouts ended in knockout wins, with the majority of them being over in a round. This guy was steamrolling. That kind of raw brutality might have been good enough for opponents on the lower rungs on the boxing ladder, but if he wanted to rise beyond journeymen and fringe contenders, Marciano would have to evolve, or risk becoming just another brawler who burned out before the top. To add to his game, his manager Al Weil brought in Charlie Goldman, a seasoned coach known for turning rough brawlers into real fighters. With Goldman in his corner, Marciano began to add a bit more finesse to his boxing, beyond simply swinging wildly and looking for a knockout. It wasn't pretty, but it was a little smarter, a little sharper, a little more dangerous. Not that it stopped him from knocking people out. Although Don Maugard became the first man to go the scheduled distance with him in his 17th fight, points victories remained a rarity with Marciano. When he stepped into the ring, you didn't expect a bell, you expected a stretcher. And sometimes that's exactly what you got. Take his brutal 6th-round knockout of Carmine Vingo, a rising prospect with a bright future. After the fight, Vingo was carried straight to a hospital 2 blocks away on a stretcher since no ambulances were available to pick him up. Unbelievable in the modern era, right? But in any case, Vingo was given just a 50-50 chance of survival, and with a shaken Marciano seen praying in the hospital corridor, a priest was brought in to deliver last rites. Fortunately, though, and almost miraculously, Vingo pulled through after emergency brain surgery. He eventually recovered, but he never boxed again. Marciano didn't fight again until he knew Vingo was going to live. It was one of the few moments in his career where the violence of boxing hit too close to home. But when he did come back, controversy followed. Marciano's next bout was one of his most debated and one that critical observers point to when questioning his legacy. His next opponent, Roland Lastarza, was his first real test, a ranked fighter with the skills to push him. And push him he did. The fight went the distance, and when the scorecards were read, the verdict was razor thin. One judge gave it to Marciano, another gave it to Lastarza, the third scored it a draw.
Roland Lastarza retires to his corner, a courageous but beaten youngster.
According to the rules in place, in the event of a tie, the referee chose the winner. He chose Marciano, but not everyone agreed. Many felt Lastarza had done enough to win, and some say that night was the closest Marciano ever came to losing his legendary unbeaten record. Close call or quiet robbery, depends who you ask. Still, Marciano continued to climb the ranks, knocking out most of those who stood in his way. One of his most notable wins came against former world champion and all-time great Joe Louis, who he sent through the ropes and into retirement in the 8th round. A brutal end for a legend, and a signal that a new force had arrived. Somewhere along the way, he'd shortened his name from Marciano to Marciano, so ring announcers would be able to pronounce it. But by the time he was knocking out names like Joe Louis, people didn't need help saying it anymore. They already knew who Rocky Marciano was. And when he was given his shot at the world title against Jersey Joe Walcott, what happened next would turn him from rising star into legend. Jersey Joe Walcott was everything Marciano wasn't: polished, experienced, and confident. He dropped Rocky in the very first round and started pulling away on the scorecards. To everyone watching, it looked like the fight was set to be just another routine defense for the champion. But then Marciano produced a single punch that changed boxing history. In the 13th, with Walcott way ahead on the cards, and only needing to hear the final bell to retain his heavyweight crown, Marciano landed a thudding right hook to Walcott's jaw that left him slumped over the ropes unconscious. He didn't move for the full count. He didn't move after that either. It went down as one of the most stunning knockouts in a world title fight ever. Once again, Marciano's sheer force of will had saved him. He didn't outbox the champ. He didn't win on points. He simply refused to lose. With that one swing, Rocky Marciano became heavyweight champion of the world. It was his 43rd professional fight, and he wasn't done yet. In the rematch, he wiped Walcott out in less than a round. Then came La Starza again, this time beating him more convincingly by technical knockout in the 11th. Next, he took on Ezzard Charles, going 15 hard rounds to win by decision. The only man to ever go the full distance with Marciano. He knocked him out conclusively in the rematch, and then knocked out his next two opponents too. He defended his title 6 times, every challenger knocked out. Then at the very top, he walked away. 49 wins, 0 losses, and no fewer than 43 of those wins coming by way of knockout. The only heavyweight champion in history to retire undefeated, and his knockout ratio of almost 88% was the highest of anyone to hold the heavyweight crown. The Italian kid from Brockton had done it. Rocky Marciano retired undefeated, rich and famous, everything he ever dreamed of. But once the gloves came off, things got murkier. His in-ring image was spotless. His life outside the ring? Not so much. And eventually, that life would lead him down the path to his tragic and suspicious early death. To what extent or how directly is up for debate, but make no mistake, the seeds were already there. Marciano had always loved money. Free was his middle name. Even when he had millions, he still chased dollars like he was broke. And when he stepped away from boxing, that obsession didn't slow down, it only sped up. He transformed from champion to hustler, jumping into the world of backroom business and untraceable cash. He didn't trust banks. He trusted himself. This kind of system might work for a genius with an infallible memory, but Rocky wasn't exactly a genius. He lent out cash all over the U.S. and would forget who owed him money. It's likely he lost a fortune this way. Money simply vanished, along with the people who borrowed it. And yet, he kept chasing the next buck. Another revenue source for the post-boxing Marciano was the dinner circuit, showing up at speaking gigs for no more than a few $100. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the hustle. But his appearances came with strange conditions, and the details shed light on a more slimy side to his character. He expected everything to be laid on for him, and despite his wealth, he refused to pay for a thing. And then, there was the other demand. According to several sources, he expected a girl to be waiting for him afterwards. And he made a point of never sleeping with the same one twice. This was part of his fee. Oh, and in case you didn't already catch on, Marciano insisted on being paid in cash and cash only. In one case, when an event organizer couldn't pay in cash, Rocky settled for half the amount he was owed just to avoid taking a check. To him, cash was real money. Checks didn't mean anything to him. Only cold, hard bills counted. And there was another predictable reason for the cash obsession: taxes. Marciano had an almost pathological aversion to paying them, and demanding his payment in cash helped him keep the taxman's hands off his money. Of course, this kind of behavior wasn't just quirky, it was shady. Marciano's post-boxing dealings were sketchy at best, and outright illegal at worst, and activities like these tend to draw in a certain crowd. This wasn't the clean-cut champion from the ring. This was a man chasing money, favors, and pleasures on his terms, in his world. A world that was growing darker and darker by the year. Marciano may have left boxing, but the spotlight followed him, and so did the mob. Even before he retired, underworld figures had taken an interest. As an Italian-American success story, he quickly became the darling of the mafia. To them, Rocky Marciano wasn't just a fighter, he was a trophy. They craved his company and were eager to be associated with him, and Marciano loved the attention and notoriety his mob connections afforded him. Living the high life without paying a dime? That was exactly his kind of deal. He soon found himself brushing shoulders with big players in mafia circles. But the true extent of his links to the mob and how much this related to his business empire is unclear. It's easy to imagine Marciano as some kind of murky businessman with a web of criminal connections and his fingers in all kinds of unsavory pies. But many insiders paint a different picture. The truth was, the mafia bosses probably saw Marciano as rather simple. A naive character who needed protecting more than anything. The bosses liked him. They looked out for him, and they gave strict orders. Don't let Rocky get his hands dirty. Lower-ranking mobsters were under instructions not to let him get involved in anything because the bosses wanted to protect his spotless image. In their eyes, having an Italian heavyweight champion of the world with a wholesome reputation reflected well on all Italians, and they wanted to keep it that way. And to be fair, Rocky seemed to want the same thing, at least when it came to boxing. He wasn't interested in throwing fights or fixing results. According to one story, he once had the chance to throw a fight for a massive sum of money. But when the offer was made, Marciano got angry and threw the man out, telling him he was ashamed the mobster was an Italian. It's clear that when it came to the ring, he drew a line. But outside of it, that line got blurrier by the year. It was after boxing that Marciano truly made his fortune. And it seems he was less meticulous in his dealings as a businessman than he was as a fighter. People who knew him said the same thing. How he was always looking for the next big opportunity, falling for bad ideas and forever losing his money through placing it in questionable schemes. He wasn't investing, he was gambling, only without knowing the odds. One time he got scammed into buying a plot of marshland in Florida. Another time, he nearly handed over money to a guy selling a so-called newly discovered cure for arthritis. He was genuinely excited about the deal until a friend stepped in and talked him out of it before it was too late. But he still made money and lots of it, and still he refused to pay for anything unless absolutely necessary. He would even get upset about losing so much as a coin. And once, when a payphone failed to return the dime he'd just put in, he proceeded to smash a whole line of them trying to get his money back. He also used his fame to score free flights across the country for his money-lending activities. But not all of the planes he traveled in afforded him the kind of luxury you'd expect the former heavyweight champion to have, or the levels of safety either. One time he hitched a ride in the back of a cargo plane. Mid-flight, a window blew out and the plane went into a dive. Marciano and his young daughter were both on board, and somehow they walked away unscathed. It should have served as a warning. It should have changed him. But it didn't. Even after staring death in the face, he'd still choose risk if it meant free. And one day, that choice would finally catch up with him. Because when Rocky Marciano boarded a plane on the eve of his 46th birthday, he never got off. Here's what we know. On August 31st, 1969, the day before his 46th birthday, Marciano boarded a small private plane headed from Chicago to Des Moines. He was on the way home to celebrate his birthday with his family, but had been offered the chance to make a quick buck through a dinner appearance for one of his mafia acquaintances. And being who he was, he couldn't resist making the stopover before heading home. Classic Marciano. But this time, the gamble cost him everything. The plane never made it. While trying to land at a small airfield in Newton, Iowa, it clipped a tree and crashed. Marciano, the pilot, and the other passenger were killed instantly. A tragic accident? Maybe. But dig a little deeper and the story starts to unravel. Let's consider the facts. The pilot flying that night was wildly unqualified. Just 231 total flight hours and only 35 logged at night. Who puts a national icon in the hands of a rookie pilot in the dark? Then there was the weather. Thunderstorms had been the forecast in Iowa. Everyone knew what they were flying into, so why didn't they cancel the flight? We've seen what Marciano was like, so maybe he simply insisted on the flight taking off due to his reckless nature. Perhaps he simply couldn't bear to miss out on the money. But no one is sure. Why was everything arranged so last minute? Why was such a high-profile figure flying under such sloppy, unsafe conditions? And who exactly put this trip together? This was Rocky Marciano, after all, and he was a big deal. Because when you start asking those questions, you realize something about his death doesn't sit right. Something smells off. Also on that plane was 28-year-old Frankie Farrell, the son of known mobster Lou Farrell, and nephew of another, the infamous Frankie One Ear Fratto. It was Frankie who had organized the trip and the one taking Marciano to Des Moines for an appearance at an insurance brokerage he was opening. Another shady business connection, another mob-affiliated name, right up to the very end. Now obviously, Farrell didn't plan the crash because he died too, but could someone have taken the opportunity to take both men out at once? No hard evidence has ever come out to suggest that it was anything other than an accident, but there's no shortage of rumors and conspiracies. Some point to the strange fact of the pilot's lack of experience. He wasn't even qualified to fly the plane they were in. There are also quiet rumors that Marciano had found himself in trouble with the mob, and for some reason, after his death, those mob connections were never fully investigated. Some say Rocky had gotten himself into trouble with the wrong people. Was he in debt, and this was payback? Others whisper about insurance fraud, or maybe he just knew too much. And this was how they silenced him. So was this really a freak accident? Or something far more calculated? The truth is, we'll probably never know. But what's certain is this. The night Rocky Marciano died, something more than a man was lost. A piece of boxing's golden era died with him, and what he left behind was hidden stashes of cash, unanswered questions, and a perfect heavyweight record that remains unbroken to this day. What do you think? Was it just a tragic mishap, or something more sinister? Drop your theory in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And before you go, hit that like button and subscribe to support us in making more boxing content like this. See you on the next one.